So this is for the Salmonella FDA confirmation. Now that it is time to pull the samples, I went ahead and pulled the samples and they're over here on my bench. I'm gonna write what time I pulled them from incubation, and I'm gonna list that information here. 2/7/24 at 13:15, and I'm gonna put my initials there. Okay, so now that I have a line out, I need to obliterate this properly. So it's just gonna be not applicable and my date and initials. That I filled in my QC for when I pulled the samples. I want to go ahead and mark across here at the top that I pulled the samples. So I will just line through this, indicating that I completed that step. And because I lined through, we need to obliterate properly. So it's gonna once again be date and initials. So my initials. Our next step is going to be streaking our plates. So we will grab our TI numbers and our plates and materials and start that process next. After the samples have finished incubating in the TET and RV tubes, we're going to streak to the selective agar plates. BSA agar, XLD agar, and HE agar for each sample and our controls. Total of 6 plates for each sample. We're gonna have 2 XLD, 2 HE, and 2 BSA plates. Now, BSA plates are light sensitive. Anytime you are not working with them, you want to put them away. So I'm actually going to put these back away while we get all of our other stuff labeled. We get everything else set up. So you can see here that I labeled the agar with the agar type on the top. So for each sample, including controls, you're going to have 6 plates total. 1 for the TET tubes and 1 for the RV tubes. To finish labeling my plates, I'm going to add the LIMS label sticker that includes my report number and sample number. And I'm just going to label those with the tube type that we're going to be streaking from. So for sample 1, we're going to have 3 that say TET and 3 that say RV, because we have 3 different types of agars. So I'm just going to do TET. And 3 that say RV. Okay, so this is just for sample 1, 3 that say TET, 3 that say RV. So 1 TET and 1 RV is going to go on the same agar type. Labeling close to the edge of the plate so that when I do get isolated colonies throughout the center of the plate, those are not covered up by the label. 1 set of TET and RV for our HEA plates. And the last set of TET and RV for our BSA. Okay, and that's the end of sample 1. So let's go ahead and go to sample 2. Here on the other side, I have my report number for sample number 2. So same thing here, TET. And 3 for RV. If you'd like to label the agar directly, you can. As long as the plates are labeled with the type of agar, the report number, the sample number, and what tube they came from for traceability, that's what's most important. Once again, just labeling each agar type with one label that says TET and one label that says RV. All right, and that is sample number 2. I went ahead and labeled my controls already, just to kind of go through those again one more time. For the control negative, we'll have 2 plates for BSA, one from the TET tube, one from the RV tube. Same thing for the HEA, and same thing for the XLB. For our second control, we have our salmonella positive but H2S negative. So once again, each agar type with the tube type and then the control. So this is that salmonella positive, H2S negative. Then we have the last control. This is the salmonella positive, H2S positive. For traceability purposes, you always want to label with the agar type, and this is going to make things easier when we do the interpretation on the following day. The agar type, what tube it came from, and the control type or the report and sample number. Now that we have our samples labeled and our plates labeled for the FDA confirmation, we're going to record the media lot number and expiration date into our QC sheet. So you can see here that each media has a designated section on the QC sheet. So I'm just going to record the TI number from the media label along with the expiration date into the corresponding boxes. Now remember that these sections here, these are for when the samples start incubation. So I won't complete this step until we finish streaking all of our samples. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that you will use a lot of plates during this confirmation, especially if you're doing multiple samples. So if you do have multiple TI numbers, if you need to open up a new lot of culture plates, just make sure that you record both TI numbers along with both expiration dates. You can record that information down here in this section or even along this section along the bottom. Just make sure that you notate a symbol so that it correlates back. So once all our plates are labeled, we're going to separate them based off of which tube it gets struck from. So once again, I'm going to place my TET plates in a row or in a column and our RV plates in a column. So I know that these 3 plates are going to get struck from the TET tube and these 3 plates are going to get struck from the RV tube. So I'm going to vortex my tubes. Once I vortex, I'll streak the corresponding tube directly onto each plate. And I just do one sample at a time so that I have fresh vortexes before I start going on to another set of plates. So just do one sample at a time. So we're going to start with the TET tube here. And vortex. A second to get warmed up. Okay. All right, and grabbing our loop, we want to make sure that we're using the yellow loop because we want to streak 10 microliters from our tube to our plate. So when we're drawing up our 10 microliters, we want to make sure that we have good surface tension within that loop, that there's no air bubbles or air pockets or anything like that, that we're getting the full 10 microliters onto our loop here. So I'm going to touch it to the top of the agar, kind of lay it down. I'll let that sample to just go onto the agar, and then I'm going to spread it all the way down through zone 1. Now when I have my samples, I like to use the bottom of my label as the end of zone 1. If you tilt the plate a little bit, you can see where the light is shining. You can see the bottom of that zone. Now when I do my zone 2, I'm gonna streak this way. You can streak this way if you would like, as long as you get all 4 quadrants represented on your plate. It does not really matter. It's gonna be whatever is most comfortable for you. So I like streaking this way and turning my plate this way. Some people like streaking this way, so I just definitely suggest when you're practicing streaking plates, try both, see what feels more comfortable to you. For me, this way feels more comfortable. So here's the bottom of my zone 1. My zone 2 is gonna come out to about right here. So I'm gonna start within my zone 1, where zone 1 and 2 overlap, and I'm gonna pull down and come back into zone 1 about 3 times and come all the way down the side of the plate. So okay, so there is my zone 2. Changing needles for zone 3, same thing, just tilt the plate so you can see where you have pulled that sample through the zone. And then right here you can see that my zone 4 is about this big. So when I do my zone 4, I'm gonna cut all the way across. There we go. Making sure to use the entire portion of the plate. I'm gonna do the same thing for each one of these plates for the sample. There are different size loops, so you want to make sure that you're using the 10 mil loop. There is a blue loop that is 1 mil, and I believe there's another loop that's a little bit bigger. So make sure you're using the 10 microliter loop. I think I said mil, I meant microliter, 10 microliter loop. So touching that liquid to the top of the agar, pulling all the way down to the bottom of that label, that is my zone 1. And then I'm going to pull through zone 1 to create my zone 2. Same thing. Pulling through zone 2 to create my zone 3, and just keep turning the plate. So I have a nice big surface area here for my zone 4. So I'm gonna pull it through and I'm gonna try to cut all the way across the plate. I can clearly see where the liquid from zone 1 is, so just really make sure not to go back into zone 1, because at this point you're trying to get isolated colonies. And if we accidentally go back into zone 1, we could pull that sample through and it could stop us from getting isolated colonies throughout that zone 4. All right, last tube. So just really making sure I don't have any air bubbles in that loop when I'm pulling that sample out of the tube. Creating my zone 3, and then finally zone 4. So let's do this again. So this time we're going to do the same sample. So sample number 1, but this time for the RV. So we're matching up the labels on each set so that we know exactly which tube each item came from. And then we go into our zone 3. And then zone 4. My zone 4 on this plate is actually quite large, so I really want to make sure I use as much of that as possible. There we go. Okay, stopping at that bottom of that label for zone 1. Remember, we don't want to dig into the plate. We definitely don't want to cause any holes or minimize as many scratches as possible. So you want to kind of lay your needle or your loop on top of the auger instead of pushing into the auger. When you hold your needle, you want to be as light with it as possible. Just really comes with practice. I actually like to bend the tip of the needle against my hand, and that kind of helps me flatten out the needle as I go across the plate. So you can see if that kind of helps you, because sometimes if you don't want to hold it like a pencil, you kind of want to hold it like a chopstick, really. Zone 3. I'm gonna have a really nice zone for zone 4. There we go. All right, last plate. For sample number 1 at least. Really making sure we don't have any air bubbles. Just laying that loop down on top, pulling all the way down to about the bottom of that label. There's our zone 2. Zone 3. Ooh, lots of scratching on that one. Okay, to see how I kind of dug in, so I'm actually just going to go ahead and switch to a different needle, and I'm going to restart my zone 4. I don't know if sometimes the needles, the seam from the plastic can cut into the auger, so you can either twist your needle and try again, or you can just grab a new needle. So I'm just going to grab a new needle. There we go. That's a lot better. Okay. So that's everything for sample 1. So now that I'm finished with these tubes, I'm going to move on to my second sample. So I have my TET tube for sample number 2 and my RV tube for sample number 2 as well. So I'm going to streak those next. Okay, now that sample number 1 is completed, I will say that when you are done with your sample, you want to separate out your BSA auger because it is light sensitive. You can see here I have a bag sitting over the top of my auger so that it stays protected from light when I'm not using it actively. So I just have this bag laying over the top. So I'll pull out what I need to streak my sample, I'll streak my sample, and then I'll put it back underneath the bag when it's done. And that goes for controls, samples, everything. You want to keep those plates protected from light whenever you're not using them.